Elena?
Jae-sung,
What are you doing here?
you two know each other?
It's a long story. Do you work here now? Elena, wait!
If you think power can replace love, stay until the end of this story. What happens next will break you. The crystal chandeliers cast diamonds across white marble floors. Soft piano music drifted through the air like expensive perfume. The Belmont was the kind of restaurant where reservations required 3 months' notice and a referral from someone who mattered. Tonight, the entire establishment had been reserved for one man. Kim Jae-sung sat at the center table, his black suit tailored to perfection, his presence commanding the room even in stillness. At 38, he had built an empire that stretched from Seoul to Los Angeles, an empire whispered about in boardrooms and back alleys alike. His organization moved money, influence, and fear with equal efficiency. Men twice his age called him Sir. Enemies disappeared before they became problems. Across from him sat Minji, his fiancée, radiant in a white dress that cost more than most people earned in a year. Her family controlled half the legitimate businesses in Koreatown. Their upcoming wedding wasn't just a union. It was a merger, a coronation, the final piece that would make him untouchable. "You're distracted," Minji said, her voice soft but perceptive. She reached across the table, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. "What are you thinking about?" Jae-sung smiled, the expression he'd perfected for moments like this, warm enough to seem genuine, controlled enough to reveal nothing. "I'm thinking that 3 weeks from now, I'll be the luckiest man in this city." She laughed, a delicate sound. "You're already the most powerful. Isn't that enough?" "Power without someone to share it with is just loneliness with better furniture," he said, lifting his wine glass. "Then I'll make sure you're never lonely again." They toasted, the crystal singing as the glasses touched. Around them, his inner circle occupied smaller tables. 8 men who'd helped him build this kingdom, who'd buried bodies and balanced books and never asked questions they didn't need answered. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a preview of the legitimacy that would come with marriage into Minji's family. Everything was perfect. The kitchen doors swung open. A waitress emerged carrying a tray, her movements careful, practiced. She wore the standard Belmont uniform, black dress, white apron, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was black, perhaps 35, with the kind of tired grace that spoke of long shifts and longer struggles. Her pregnant belly was visible even beneath the apron. She approached their table, her eyes down, professional. "Your first course," she said quietly, beginning to set down plates. Jae-sung glanced up. The world stopped. The plate in her hand trembled. China rattled against crystal. Her breath caught audibly. "Elena!" Her name escaped his lips before he could stop it. Barely a whisper, but loud enough. Minji's head snapped toward him, her smile freezing. The waitress, Elena, stood motionless, her hand still gripping the tray. 7 years collapsed into seconds. 7 years since he'd last seen those eyes, since he'd heard her voice, since he'd destroyed everything they'd built together. "I'm sorry," Elena said, her voice professionally neutral despite the way her hands shook. "I'll just... wait." Jae-sung stood abruptly, his chair scraping against marble. The sound echoed through the restaurant. Conversations at the other tables died. 8 sets of eyes turned toward their boss, confusion rippling through his men. Minji stood as well, her expression shifting from confusion to something sharper. "Jae-sung, what's happening?" He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. His entire focus was locked on the woman in front of him, the ghost he thought he'd buried, now standing 3 feet away, wearing a waitress uniform, and carrying his past like a bomb. Elena set down the tray with shaking hands. I'll send another server. No. His voice came out harder than intended. Don't leave. I have to work. Her eyes finally met his, and in them he saw everything he'd thrown away. Love, trust, a future that could have been. And beneath it all, a sadness so deep it had calcified into something harder. Excuse me. She turned toward the kitchen. Elena, please. Who is she? Minji's voice cut through, sharp as broken glass. The entire restaurant was watching now. His empire, built on control and calculated moves, was crumbling because a waitress had walked through the wrong door. Jae-sung looked at his fiancée, at the confusion and rising anger in her face, then back at Elena's retreating form. An old friend, he said, the lie tasting like ash. Minji's eyes narrowed. Old friends don't make you look like you've seen a ghost. Elena disappeared through the kitchen doors. The moment she was gone, Jae-sung felt the loss like a physical wound. He sat down slowly, his mind racing. Of all the restaurants in Los Angeles, of all the nights, of all the impossible coincidences. She looked terrified of you, Minji said, still standing. Why would a waitress be terrified of you? One of his men, Chang-ho, approached the table cautiously. Boss, is there a problem? No problem, Jae-sung said automatically. Everything's fine. But everything wasn't fine. His heart was hammering against his ribs. His hands, which had stayed steady while signing death warrants, were trembling. 7 years ago, he'd made a choice. He'd chosen power over love, empire over family, the life he wanted over the life she needed. He'd told himself it was the right choice. He'd told himself she was better off. He'd told himself he'd never see her again. The dinner continued, but Jae-sung tasted nothing. He smiled at appropriate moments, nodded when Minji spoke, but his mind was in the kitchen, wondering if Elena was still there, wondering what she was thinking, wondering how the universe could be cruel enough to bring her back now, when he finally had everything he'd sacrificed her for. 30 minutes later, another waitress brought their main course. What happened to the other server? Minji asked, her tone pointed. She felt ill, the new waitress said. She's taking a break. Jae-sung stood again. Excuse me, I need to make a phone call. Now? Minji's voice carried an edge. During our celebration dinner? It's urgent. 5 minutes. He didn't wait for permission. He walked toward the back of the restaurant, past his confused men, past the curious stares of other diners. He found a server and pulled him aside, pressing $200 bills into his palm. The pregnant waitress who was here earlier, where is she? The server glanced at the money, then toward the kitchen. Break room, I think. But sir, guests aren't supposed to... Which way? The server pointed to a hallway past the restrooms. Jae-sung moved quickly, his expensive shoes silent on the carpet. He found the break room, a small, tired space, with lockers and a worn couch that contrasted sharply with the restaurant's luxury. Elena sat on the couch, her hands pressed against her swollen belly, her eyes closed. She wasn't crying. Somehow, that made it worse. You shouldn't be here, she said without opening her eyes. Elena, whatever you're about to say, I don't want to hear it. Her eyes opened, meeting his with a directness that hit harder than any weapon. I need this job. Please just let me work. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. I didn't know you were. I had no idea. That I was in Los Angeles? That I was alive? That I kept the baby you told me to get rid of? Her voice remained quiet, but each word landed like a blade. Why would you know? You made it very clear 7 years ago that we were done. I looked for you. The words tumbled out, desperate. After you left, I tried to find you. You disappeared. I survived. She stood, one hand supporting her back, her uniform straining against her pregnancy. That's what you told me to do, remember? Survive without you. The memory crashed over him. Their last conversation. Elena crying, telling him she was pregnant, begging him to leave the life, to choose their family. And him, 20 feet tall, with power and pride, telling her she had to choose. Abort the baby, or leave his world. He'd thought he was protecting his empire, protecting her from the dangers that came with his name. He'd been so certain she would stay. I was wrong, he said, and the admission felt like removing a bullet from a wound that had never healed. Elena, I was wrong about everything. I thought I was protecting you. I thought the life I was building was too dangerous for a child. You thought power was more important than family. She walked toward her locker, began gathering her things. You weren't wrong. You were honest, and I respected that honesty enough to leave. I never stopped thinking about you. Don't. The word cracked like a whip. Don't do that. Don't stand here in your $1,000 suit, about to marry some woman out there, and tell me you thought about me. I don't need your guilt, or your nostalgia, or whatever this is. It's not nostalgia. He moved closer, drawn by a gravity he'd been fighting for 7 years. Seeing you again. Elena, I've spent 7 years building everything I thought I wanted, and the second I saw your face, I realized none of it matters. She laughed, bitter and broken. You're about to get married. I'll call it off. No, you won't. I will. Elena, I swear. You won't, she repeated, her voice steady now, sad. Because that marriage isn't about love, it's about power. And power is what you chose then, and it's what you'll choose now. That's not fair. Fair? Her eyes flashed. You want to talk about fair? I raised our daughter alone. I worked 3 jobs while pregnant because you told me to disappear. I gave birth in a county hospital without insurance because I couldn't use any of the money I'd saved. Your enemies were watching for any trace of me. I lived in a studio apartment in the worst part of town because anywhere nice would have put a target on her back. The words hit him like physical blows. Daughter? We have a daughter? Elena's expression softened just slightly, the way it always did when she thought of her child, their child. Her name is Sarah. She's 6 years old. She has your eyes and my stubbornness, and she's the only good thing that came from us. I want to meet her. No. Elena, please. I said no. She zipped up her bag, slinging it over her shoulder. I have another hour on my shift, and then I'm going home to my daughter, and you're going back to your fiancé, and we're going to pretend this never happened. I can't pretend this never happened. He grabbed her arm gently, desperately. You're pregnant again. Is it not yours? She pulled away from his touch. I met someone, a teacher, a good man who wanted to be a father, who didn't require me to choose between him and our child. The jealousy that roared through him was irrational and overwhelming. Where is he now? He died. Her voice went flat. Car accident 3 months ago. So here I am, pregnant and alone again. Except this time, I knew better than to expect anything from anyone. Let me help you. With what? Money? She shook her head. I don't want your money. Protection. Safety. You're pregnant and working on your feet. I've been taking care of myself for 7 years, Jae-sung. I don't need you to swoop in and play savior because your conscience is bothering you. It's not about my conscience. He moved to block the door, not trapping her but pleading. Elena, I let you go once. It was the biggest mistake of my life. I'm not making it again. You're not letting me go. I'm choosing to leave. There's a difference. She met his eyes, and in that moment, she looked more powerful than he'd ever felt. You taught me that choice, remember? You gave me an ultimatum, our baby or your empire. I chose our baby. You chose empire. We both got what we chose. I was young, stupid, scared. You were 29 years old and running a criminal organization. You weren't scared of anything except vulnerability. She stepped around him, reaching for the door. The only thing that scares powerful men is needing someone more than they need power. Then I'm terrified, he whispered. Because standing here right now, I would trade everything I've built for 5 minutes of what we had. Her hand paused on the doorknob. For a moment, just a moment, her expression cracked, revealing the woman who had once loved him, who had believed in a future where he could be both powerful and present, where empire and family could coexist. The tragedy isn't that you'd trade it now, she said quietly. The tragedy is that you wouldn't trade it when it mattered, when I was pregnant and scared and begging you to choose us, when our daughter asked why she didn't have a daddy, when I had to explain to a 6-year-old that her father loved her, but loved other things more. I never stopped loving you. Love isn't enough, Jae-sung. I learned that the hard way. She opened the door. Your fiancé is probably wondering where you are. Go back to your table. Go back to your empire. Go back to the life you chose. Elena, goodbye. She walked out, leaving him alone in the break room, surrounded by time clocks and tired lockers and the ghost of a life he'd destroyed. For several minutes, he stood there, his empire waiting in the dining room, his future wife wondering where he'd gone, his carefully constructed world fracturing around the one variable he'd never planned for. When he finally returned to the table, Minji's expression had shifted from confusion to cold calculation. 15 minutes, she said as he sat down. You were gone for 15 minutes. I'm sorry. Business, don't lie. To me. Her voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut. I've watched you negotiate with men who could end your life. I've seen you stay calm when our families were threatened. But that waitress made you panic. So tell me the truth. Who is she? Around them, his men pretended not to listen while hanging on every word. This was how empires fell. Not through violence, but through exposure. Through the revelation of weaknesses enemies could exploit. It's complicated, he said. Then, uncomplicated. He looked at Minji, beautiful, intelligent, perfect for the life he'd built. She would stand beside him at fundraisers and family gatherings. She would give him legitimacy, connections, a path to transform his criminal empire into something respectable. She was everything he'd worked toward. She wasn't Elena. We knew each other, he said carefully. Years ago, before I met you. It ended badly. Seeing her again was unexpected. You loved her. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Minji set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. I need to use the restroom. She stood gracefully and walked away. The moment she was out of earshot, Chang-ho leaned over from the adjacent table. Boss, what's going on? Who was that woman? It's handled. That didn't look handled. That looked like... I said it's handled. His tone ended the conversation. But it wasn't handled. Nothing was handled. He could feel his carefully constructed evening unraveling, could sense his men's confusion, could see in their eyes the first seeds of doubt. A leader who lost control was a leader who invited challenges. 10 minutes later, Minji hadn't returned. Jae-sung went looking for her and found her near the kitchen, speaking with the restaurant manager in hushed, urgent tones. When she saw him approaching, she dismissed the manager with a wave. Her name is Elena Wright, Minji said. She's been working here for 3 months. Single mother, living in Koreatown, pregnant with her second child. The father died recently. How did you? The same way you know everything about everyone. I asked someone who knows. She crossed her arms. What I don't know is why my fiancé looks at a struggling waitress like she's the only person in the room. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. He could lie. He'd built an empire on strategic deceptions, on telling people what they needed to hear. But looking at Minji's face, he realized she already knew. Women like her didn't survive in their world by being naive. She was my wife, he said. The words hung in the air between them like a detonation. Your wife. Minji's voice remained eerily calm. Not girlfriend, not affair. Wife. It was a long time ago. Before everything. Before the organization became what it is now. We were young, and I thought... He stopped, realizing how pathetic it sounded. It ended 7 years ago. Did you divorce? The question landed like a punch. In the chaos of Elena's departure, in the years of building his empire, he'd never actually filed the papers. He'd told himself it didn't matter, that she was gone, that the legal technicality was irrelevant. His silence was answer enough. Oh my God. Minji's calm cracked. You're still married to her. After everything. After proposing to me. After our families negotiated. After the wedding invitations were sent. You're still married to another woman? It's just paperwork. It doesn't mean... It means everything. Her voice rose, and several diners turned to look. She lowered it again, but the fury remained. Do you understand what this does? To me? To my family? We announced our engagement to everyone who matters in this city. And now I find out you're legally married to a pregnant waitress? She has nothing to do with us. She has everything to do with us. How do you think this looks? The great Kim Jae-sung, about to marry into the Choi family, can't even manage his own. Personal affairs? She laughed, bitter. My father is going to lose his mind. Our alliance, everything we've been building, I'll fix this. How? By divorcing her now? That looks even worse, like you scrambled to cover up a secret the moment it was exposed. By staying married? Then our wedding is invalid, and you've humiliated my entire family. She was right. Every option was a trap. In trying to build an empire, he'd created a foundation built on lies, and now the whole structure was collapsing. I need to think, he said. You need to think? Minji's eyes flashed. I've spent the last hour thinking. I've thought about how this makes me look. I've thought about how many people will hear this story by tomorrow. I've thought about whether I can trust a man who kept a wife hidden for 7 years. I didn't keep her hidden. She left. And you never mentioned her. Not once, in 2 years of dating, did you think to mention you were married. It didn't seem relevant. Everything is relevant in our world. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You taught me that. You built an empire on knowing everything about everyone, on using information as currency. And yet you thought your own marriage didn't matter? He had no answer. Every word he could say would make it worse. I'm leaving, Minji said finally. I need to talk to my father. He'll want to discuss how we handle this. Handle this? Minji, we can... There is no we right now. She pulled off her engagement ring, the diamond catching the light one last time. Not until you figure out who you actually are. The man who builds empires? Or the man who can't let go of the past? She pressed the ring into his palm and walked away, her heels clicking against marble, her departure watched by every person in the restaurant. Jae-sung stood there, the ring burning in his hand, his perfect evening shattered. When he returned to the table, his men stood. "We're leaving," he said. No one argued. The ride back to his office was silent, the tension in the car thick enough to choke on. His phone buzzed constantly. Minji's father, other family heads, allies wanting to know what had happened, why the celebration had ended early, whether the wedding was still happening. He ignored every call. In his office, alone, he poured a drink and stood at the window, looking out over the city he controlled. Millions of lights stretched to the horizon. Thousands of lives touched by his decisions. An empire built over 15 years, brick by bloody brick. And all he could think about was Elena's face when she'd said, "You didn't lose me when I left. You lost me when you chose power." His phone rang again. This time, it was Chang Ho. "Boss, Minji's father is calling an emergency meeting. The other families want answers about what happened tonight." "Tell them it's personal business. They're saying it affects the alliance. If you're still married to someone else, I'll handle it." "How?" "Good question. How did you handle a mistake 7 years in the making? How did you explain that you'd built an empire on the grave of the only thing that had ever mattered?" "I said I'll handle it." He ended the call. For hours, he sat in his office, drinking expensive whiskey and staring at his phone. He could call Elena. He had resources. Finding her address would take one phone call. But what would he say? What could he possibly say that would undo 7 years of abandonment? At 3 a.m, he made a decision. He called his lawyer. "I need you to draft divorce papers," he said, when the man answered, groggy and confused. "My wife. I need to legally end my marriage." "I didn't know you were married, Mr. Kim. It's complicated. How fast can you do it?" "If both parties agree, maybe a month. I need it faster." "Mr. Kim, the legal process." "Find a way." He hung up. The next 3 days were a carefully orchestrated disaster. Word of the restaurant incident spread through their world like wildfire. Minji's family demanded explanations. His allies questioned his judgment. Rivals sensed weakness and began testing boundaries, making small moves that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. And through it all, Jae-sung searched for Elena. She'd quit her job at the Belmont the next day. Her apartment in Koreatown was empty, a "for rent" sign already in the window. Her daughter's school had no forwarding information. It was as if she'd vanished again, except this time he understood why. She was protecting herself, protecting their daughter, protecting the life she'd built from the wreckage of what he'd destroyed. On the 4th day, Minji came to his office. She looked tired, her usual perfect composure slightly frayed. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "My father wants to proceed with the wedding," she said without preamble. "What?" "Not because he forgives you, because canceling now would make both our families look weak." She sat down across from his desk. "He's willing to overlook your situation, if you handle it quietly. Divorce your wife, make sure she signs an NDA, ensure this never becomes public knowledge. And you? What do you want?" Minji was quiet for a long moment. "I want to believe that what we're building is more important than what you lost. I want to believe that you can move forward instead of backward. But mostly, I want to know if you're capable of it." "Capable of what?" "Choosing the future over the past, choosing empire over nostalgia, choosing me over a ghost." She leaned forward. "Can you do that, Jae-sung? Can you let her go?" He thought about Elena's face in the restaurant, the way she'd looked at him, not with hatred, which would have been easier, but with a sadness so profound it suggested she'd already mourned him years ago. "I can try," he said. "That's not good enough." Minji stood. "Let me know when you're certain." She left, and Jae-sung returned to the window, to the city that had cost him everything to win. His phone buzzed. A message from one of his investigators. Found her. Address attached. She's staying with a friend in Long Beach. His finger hovered over the address. One click, and he'd know where she was. One drive, and he could see her again, could beg for another chance, could try to salvage something from the wreckage. But what was the point? She'd made her choice 7 years ago when she'd chosen their daughter over his empire, and he'd made his choice when he'd let her walk away. Nothing had changed except his regrets. He deleted the message. The next week, the wedding plans resumed. Minji's family accepted his assurances that the situation was handled. His lawyer expedited the divorce papers. Though Elena's signature would be required, he'd have to find her eventually, have to face her one more time to officially end what he'd emotionally ended 7 years ago. But for now, he threw himself into the wedding preparations, into the alliance it would cement, into the legitimacy it would bring. He attended tastings and approved seating charts and smiled at family members who asked pointed questions about his previous marriage. He built his empire higher, and every night, alone in his mansion, he wondered what Elena was doing. If their daughter looked like her, if the new baby would be a boy or girl, if she thought about him at all, or if she'd successfully erased him from her life the way he'd tried and failed to erase her from his. 2 weeks before the wedding, he received a package. Inside were divorce papers, already signed. No note, no message. Just Elena's signature on the dotted line, legally ending what had emotionally ended years ago. Also in the package, a photograph. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, with his eyes and Elena's smile, standing in a park, laughing at something off camera. On the back, in Elena's handwriting, Sarah. She's happy. That's all you need to know. He stared at the photo for hours, memorizing every detail. His daughter's face, the joy in her expression, the life she was living without him. He tried to feel relief that she was happy, that Elena had built something good from the wreckage. Instead, he felt hollow. The wedding happened 3 days later. 500 guests, perfect weather, speeches about unity and power and the bright future ahead. Minji looked stunning. The alliance was official. His empire had never been stronger. And standing at the altar, making vows to a woman he respected but didn't love, Jae-sung thought about Elena's words. You didn't lose me when I left. You lost me when you chose power. The reception was flawless. Music, dancing, toasts from men who controlled the city's underworld and others who controlled its legitimate face. Jae-sung played his part perfectly. The successful boss, the dutiful husband, the man who had everything. At midnight, he stepped outside for air. Chong-ho followed, lighting a cigarette. Hell of a party, boss. Yeah. You did it. Everything you've been working toward. The legitimacy, the alliance, the empire. It's all here. Yeah. Chang-ho studied him. So why do you look like you lost? Jae-sung didn't answer. How could he explain that winning felt like defeat? That standing on top of the world felt like standing on a grave? She's gone, you know, Chang-ho said quietly. The woman from the restaurant. Word is she left California entirely. Headed east, maybe the Carolinas or something. New city, new life. Good, Jae-sung said. That's good. Is it? He looked at Chang-ho, this man who'd been with him since the beginning, who'd helped him build everything. What do you think? Chang-ho took a long drag on his cigarette. I think 7 years ago you made a choice. You chose this. He gestured at the mansion, the party, the empire, over her. and you got exactly what you chose. Most men would call that winning. And what do you call it? I call it the price of power, boss. We all pay it. Some of us just pay more than others. He dropped the cigarette, crushing it under his heel. The question isn't whether you made the right choice. The question is whether you can live with it. Could he? Jae-sung looked up at the sky, at the stars barely visible through the city's light pollution, and wondered if Elena could see them wherever she was. Wondered if she ever looked up and thought about what they could have been. Probably not. She'd moved on, built a new life, protected their daughter from the world he inhabited. She'd done what he'd asked her to do 7 years ago. She'd survived without him. She'd just done it better than he'd survived without her. Inside, Minji was laughing at something her father said. His wife, his partner in empire, the future of everything he'd built. And somewhere across the country, Elena was preparing for a new baby, raising their daughter, living a life where he was nothing but a painful memory. You didn't lose me when I left. You lost me when you chose power. He'd told himself for 7 years that he'd made the right choice, that power was safety, that empire was security, that a man in his position couldn't afford the vulnerability of family. But standing here, on his wedding night, surrounded by everything he'd fought for, Jae-sung finally understood the truth. He hadn't protected Elena by sending her away. He'd protected himself, protected his empire from the one thing that could truly destroy it. Love that demanded he be more than powerful, more than feared, more than the king of a kingdom built on blood and money. Love that demanded he be human. And now it was too late. The divorce was final. The wedding was done. Elena was gone. His daughter was a stranger, and the empire he'd chosen over them felt like a mausoleum. Beautiful, impressive, and utterly empty. Chung-ho clapped him on the shoulder. Come on, boss. Your wife is looking for you. Jae-sung followed, him inside, back to the party, back to the life he'd chosen. He danced with Minji, accepted congratulations from men who controlled the city's shadows, smiled for photographs that would hang in his office as evidence of his success. And every smile felt like a lie. Because he'd won. He'd built his empire, secured his legacy, achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish when he'd sent Elena away. But winning had never felt more like losing. The party ended at 2 a.m. Guests departed in luxury cars, heading back to lives where power equaled happiness, where success meant having more than everyone else, where empire was the ultimate goal. Jae-sung stood alone in the garden, the mansion behind him, the city before him, and for the first time in 7 years, he let himself cry. Not for what he'd lost. That was gone, irretrievable. But for what he'd chosen, and the slow, terrible realization that he'd chosen wrong. He pulled out his phone, opened the photo of Sarah one more time. His daughter, happy and whole in a world he'd never be part of. I'm sorry, he whispered to the image. I'm so sorry. The words disappeared into the night, unheard, meaningless. Somewhere across the country, Elena was sleeping, her hand on her pregnant belly, their daughter safe in the next room. She'd built a life without him. She'd chosen love over empire. She'd chosen right. Jae-sung deleted the photo. What was the point of keeping it? Of torturing himself with evidence of what he'd sacrificed? He went inside, climbed the stairs to the bedroom where his new wife was waiting, and prepared to spend the rest of his life living with his choice. In the morning, he woke up to a city he controlled, an empire at its peak, and a hollow victory that tasted like ash. He'd ruled everything except the one thing he'd needed to survive. The months that followed were a masterclass in emptiness, disguised as success. Jae-sung expanded his operations, absorbed a rival's territory, laundered money through legitimate businesses Minji's family provided. On paper, he was unstoppable. In practice, he was a ghost inhabiting his own life. Minji noticed. She was too smart not to. "You're somewhere else," she said one night over dinner, their 3rd month of marriage. Every conversation, every meeting, you're physically present but mentally absent. Where do you go? "Just thinking about business." "I've seen you think about business. This is different." She set down her fork. "This is regret." He didn't deny it. "I can't compete with a memory, Jae-sung. I can build an empire with you. I can stand beside you through wars and negotiations and everything our world throws at us. But I can't compete with a woman who exists in your mind as perfect because she's gone. You're not competing. I am. Every day. And I'm losing to someone who isn't even here." She stood. "I need you to make a choice. Be present in this marriage or end it. But don't insult me by pretending we're partners when your heart is 3,000 miles away." She was right. And he hated that she was right. That night, he tried. He pushed thoughts of Elena aside, focused on Minji, attempted to build something real with the woman he'd actually married. They talked about the future, about expanding their influence, about the children they'd eventually have. But when she fell asleep, he lay awake, wondering if Elena had given birth yet, if the baby was healthy, if Sarah had asked about him. The wondering was killing him slowly, a death by 1,000 cuts, each one a reminder of what he'd traded for power. 6 months into the marriage, Minji asked for a separation. "Not a divorce," she clarified. "Just space. Time for you to figure out what you actually want. Because right now, you're a terrible husband, and you're making me a terrible wife by forcing me to compete with a ghost." He didn't fight it. What could he say? That he'd try harder? That this time he'd mean it? He moved into one of his other properties, a penthouse overlooking the city. At night, he stood at the window and counted his wins. Territory controlled, money earned, enemies defeated, allies secured. The math didn't add up to happiness. Chang-ho visited one evening, bringing expensive whiskey and uncomfortable truths. "The men are worried," he said, pouring 2 glasses. "They're not questioning your leadership yet, but they're questioning your focus. You've won every battle this year, but you look like you've lost a war. I'm fine. You're not. And in our world, not fine is dangerous." Chung-ho handed him a glass. "I'm going to say something, and you're going to hate me for it. But someone needs to say it." "Go ahead. Find her. Go to wherever she is. Talk to her. See your daughter. Get closure or get her back. But stop living in this purgatory where you're haunted by a woman you're too proud to chase." "She doesn't want to be found. She made that clear." "Then force the issue. You're Kim Jae-sung. You've toppled empires, bought judges, made men disappear. But you can't find one pregnant woman." Chang-ho leaned forward. "Or is it that you can find her, but you're too afraid of what happens when you do?" The truth hit like a bullet. What if I find her, and she still says no? What if I see my daughter, and she doesn't know me? What if I go there and realize that the life I destroyed is better without me in it? Then at least you'll know. Right now, you're dying from uncertainty. Go get certainty, whatever it looks like. That night, Jae-sung made a call to his investigator. "Find Elena Wright. I don't care where she is or how long it takes. Find her." It took 4 days. Elena was in Charleston, South Carolina. She'd given birth to a son 3 months earlier. She worked at a community center teaching art to kids. Sarah was in 2nd grade. They lived in a small house near the water, far from the empire he'd built, far from the danger that came with his name. The investigator sent photos. Elena laughing with her children, Sarah playing in the backyard, the baby sleeping in a carrier on Elena's chest. They looked happy, complete, whole. Jae-sung stared at the photos for hours, memorizing every detail, understanding with crushing clarity that Chang-ho was wrong. There was no closure waiting for him in Charleston. There was only confirmation of what he already knew. Elena had built a better life without him. He didn't go. What would be the point? To disrupt her peace? To force himself into a world where he didn't belong? To make his pain her problem? Instead, he set up a trust fund, anonymous, untraceable, enough to ensure Sarah and the new baby would never want for anything. College tuition, medical care, a cushion for emergencies. The lawyer who managed it had strict instructions. Elena was never to know where it came from. It was the only fatherhood he could offer. Money in place of presence, security instead of love. It felt pathetic, but it was all he had. The years crawled by. Jae-sung and Min-ji reconciled, their marriage evolving into something functional but cold, a business partnership that occasionally shared a bed. They had a child, a son, and Jae-sung tried to be present, tried to be the father he'd never been to Sarah. But some nights, he'd hold his son and wonder about his daughter. Wonder if she remembered him at all, or if Elena had erased him completely. Wonder if she'd ever ask about her father, and what Elena would say. He hoped Elena told her he'd been a coward. It was the truth. On Sarah's 10th birthday, he broke his own rule. He flew to Charleston, rented a car, and drove to Elena's house. He didn't knock. He just sat across the street, watching through the window as they celebrated. Elena, Sarah, the younger boy, a few friends from school. Sarah had grown. She looked so much like Elena it hurt. She laughed at something her mother said, blew out candles on a cake, opened presents with the unself-conscious joy of a child who'd never known abandonment. She looked happy. And sitting in his car, watching the life he could have had, Jae-sung finally understood the full weight of his choice. He hadn't just lost Elena. He'd lost Sarah's first steps, her first words, her first day of school. He'd lost bedtime stories and scraped knees and the 1,000 tiny moments that made a family. He'd traded all of it for an empire that felt more like a prison every day. As he watched, Elena glanced toward the window. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance. He didn't know if she actually saw him or if it was coincidence, but her expression shifted. A flicker of sadness, of recognition, of something that looked like pity. Then she turned back to the party, to her children, to the life she'd built. And Jae-sung drove away, returning to the city where he was king, to the empire he'd chosen, to the hollow victory that would follow him to his grave. He ruled everything except the one thing that mattered. And he'd spend the rest of his life paying the price. If this story hit you differently than you expected, if you felt the weight of choices that can't be undone, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories that make you think twice about what really matters. Drop a comment telling me if you think he made the right choice, or if there was a moment he could have changed everything. And hit that like button if you believe some victories cost more than they're worth. Because the most powerful endings aren't the happy ones. They're the ones that remind us what we can't afford to lose.